All right. Good evening, good afternoon, good day, and good morning from wherever you may be tuning in from across the world. And welcome to the first of our Milk Chocolate monthly webinars. For those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of speaking to just yet, whether it be over Zoom or just via email, my name is Jack Bailey and I'm the Growth Manager here at Milk Chocolate. And tonight I'm lucky enough to be joined by the other gentleman on your screen, Brad Purcell, our national acquisitions manager, I should say. So throughout the next hour or so, look, we'll be taking and talking about the current state of the property market here in Australia, our thoughts and narratives on a slightly more micro level, and where we believe the market is heading in the next few years. We'll also be providing some examples of areas that we're investing in, explaining the reasons as to why we're doing as such, and showing some properties that we've purchased on behalf of our clients, our logic behind these purchases, as well as the performance we've seen on these investments so far. After this, we'll be answering some questions that have been presented to us prior via email, and hopefully after that, we'll have enough time to conduct a live Q&A where we'll welcome any questions you may have and do our best to answer as best as possible, and as many of those as possible, time pending. So before launching into this evening's proceedings, there is just a few housekeeping matters that I'll quickly address. First and foremost, and probably most importantly, any advice given throughout this webinar is strictly advice of a general nature. Secondly, we welcome any and all questions, and if we can't answer them all at the end whilst we're conducting our Q&A, we'll get back to you personally after the webinar. And thirdly, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for you to watch and digest in hopefully under 24 hours, but I will send an email link once it is available. So I guess without further ado, we'll get stuck right in, and look, it's an exciting time. It is again our first webinar, and again, I'm very lucky to have Brad here by my side, helping me do it. So one second while I just pull up the presentation, and look, basically, I guess a very quick summary for those of you that haven't quite dealt with Milk Chocolate so much so far, or know too much about us, what we do here and who we are. Basically, here at Milk Chocolate, we plan, research, purchase, construct, and manage properties in Australia, whether that's your forever home or an investment property. We harness the power of data, which we're really big on, and technology to build tailor-made game plans to suit our clients' needs. We reduce risk and build trust, making some of life's most difficult decisions effortless. Now, as I spoke about before, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Brad, again, as you can see here. And look, Brad is a real estate veteran of over 20 years across purchasing, selling, and property management. Brad is responsible for overseeing our national purchasing strategies, and utilises the data provided by our analytics team, which is a really strong team, and we rely very heavily on their input to make those informed decisions. And look, a bit about myself, I'm the growth manager here, and I've always had a passion for real estate. I was born and raised in Mosman on Sydney's Lower North Shore, quite luckily, but I've recently repatriated and returned from living in Toronto, where I was working for an Australian startup. So I guess I understand the pain points of our expat clientele, which is quite predominant, and what we see a lot of, quite well. So yeah, essentially that's a bit of a brief introduction to us too, and you will get to know us over, again, the course of the next hour a bit better. So I guess a really good place to start would be addressing the elephant in the room. Now I'm going to throw over to Bradley with this one, because I do believe he is the expert when we talk about the acquisition phase and the purchasing of houses. And obviously we are going through a boom per se at the moment. I don't want to use that word. Bradley will kill me, but inevitably the data is suggesting that we are seeing some pretty, I guess, strong and solid growth. So what I'll show is this table essentially, and I'll get Brad to talk to this, and then after that we'll have a bit of running commentary. So Brad, please lead the way.
No worries, mate. Thank you, Jack, and good morning or good evening, anyone from where you guys are. So the elephant in the room, and effectively the concept we're talking about here is that it's no surprise that the Australian real estate market is very, very strong at this point in time, and we've seen some very accelerated price growth over the last 3 months in particular, but realistically since the softening of the COVID restrictions toward the end of 2020, but primarily since probably February, we've seen some significant price growth. And that has raised significant questions from a range of different people about what that means for the marketplace moving forward in the short term. and effectively our objective is to try and address some of those questions and concerns as best we can in this little period of time that we've got with you guys now. So you may or may not have seen some headlines recently that talks about the most accelerated price growth, or we've just witnessed the most accelerated price growth since 1988. And some of this feedback is what's fueling the rhetoric that a lot of people are talking about or hearing about. It is the fact that the data doesn't lie, and the data supports that. That the fact, and this is what this little chart shows here, that the month-to-month change in national dwelling values, this is the most acceleration we've experienced since in and around March of 1988, which is exactly what we're seeing on the ground. There is significant competition, and there is a shortage of stock, and that's somewhat what we'll talk about as we progress through. And that's basically where we'll kick off, Jack.
Yeah. I think, look, there are quite a few factors affecting the market. Again, I'll let Brad talk to them, but we've kind of pulled out the main ones that we feel are really affecting them in the most, substantial ways. So first and foremost, Brad, I'll let you talk to this one, but I think this is definitely one of the key ones. So
yeah, so the real estate market, like any marketplace, is supply and demand driven, which I'm probably telling something that you guys know, but effectively when there's an overwhelming supply and there's not as much demand, that's where we start to see prices soften, and the reverse, which is what we're sort of seeing at the moment, where there's a significant amount of demand for property and a very distinct shortage of stock. That's where we start to see this premium price effect take place. And the key graph that we're looking at here is the one on the right-hand side of the page, the total listings rolling 28-day count nationally. So you can see that the 2021 result has us significantly lower than the last 5 years. So the number of total listings that nationally on a rolling 28-day count for March up to March 28th of March 2021. You can see 2016, 17, 18, 19, and even the start of January 2020, or the COVID year, was there was a lot more stock available. Whereas at this point in time, you can see where 2021 is. There is much less, and the side effect of that, coupled with the amount of people who are looking to transact in real estate at the moment, is what we're seeing on the ground with the prices that people are prepared to pay for property. But the big question I think that leads to, and is on a lot of people's minds, is what does that mean for the market, short term and medium term? And that's what we want to try and address some of those things today. One of the other key factors when we tie in the unavailability of stock is the availability for people to get access to funds at significantly discounted rates in comparison to what they have been historically. So it's no surprise, everybody is aware and everybody knows that interest rates are at an all-time low, and the ability to borrow money at a cheap rate is relatively easy. And as a result of that, people's ability to increase their budgets for the right homes as a result of the current lack of stock is what we're seeing on a daily basis at this point in time. So that probably leads us to the big question in the big end, right? Warning on booming house prices and media clickbait. So the Australian real estate industry, well, the marketplace, I should say, is always very heavily influenced by the media and media commentary, and rightly so, because that's where the majority of people get access to their information to make their purchasing decisions. But these fearful sort of headlines don't paint the actual picture of what's realistically taking place in terms of the real estate market being very cyclical, and where we are at the start, where we are at those cycles, and what factors are taking place to potentially continue what we're seeing. So, Jack, you probably agree, and some of the feedback that we're receiving on the ground on a daily basis is it a right time to buy? Am I going to be paying too much money for a house? And am I likely to experience a decrease in value over the short to medium term if I buy a house now? And obviously there is no crystal ball, and nobody can tell you exactly what's going to happen. However, we've pieced together our expert team of data analytics and economists as well as other external influences in terms of the experts that provide commentary that is generally highly accurate. couple that with exactly what we're seeing in the cities and the towns that we're buying houses in to try and give you a bit more of an accurate forecast rather than just scary headlines.
Yeah, and I definitely think, look, this is just one example of many pieces of clickbait, that we're seeing appear on all the mainstream media sites on a daily basis. And for a lot of our clients and potentially for a lot of you, who are quite time poor and are just looking at really the headlines and trying to grab a really good feel of where the market is, it's really, really feeding into the hysteria when, that's essentially what you're seeing, not only on a daily basis, but, again, that's an updated article that was updated, an hour after I took that screenshot. So it is really, really feeding into this fear and this FOMO. But I guess, there are some other, key kind of ideas and things. So, I think vendors are still very cautious, and Brad will speak to this as well, about selling. There is the worry that when you sell, you'd really like to upgrade, especially in a market like this. But most people are thinking quite logically and going, am I going to be able to even move laterally, or am I going to have to downgrade? So, Brad, would you agree with that assessment?
Mate, that is almost exactly what's happening in the majority of marketplaces that we're working in. So, for the end of 2020, there was a lower level of consumer confidence, and therefore people were cautious about placing their properties on the market because they weren't sure what was going to take place. That's no longer what's stopping people from putting the house on the market. What's stopping people from putting the house on the market at this point in time is the fear: if I sell now, and particularly if I'm upgrading, am I going to be priced out if I can't find a house to buy? Or particularly also because rental markets are quite tight. So if I can't find a house to buy, am I going to be able to get somewhere to rent? And there is a genuine fear that if I sell now, I'm not going to have anywhere to live. And that is a real concern. So, but also, to take one step back with what we're speaking about previously, we're not suggesting that you throw caution to the wind and be prepared to pay whatever price is required to purchase an asset. There still needs to be an absolute level of due diligence and consideration placed, and an avoidance of irresponsible competition to buy whatever house we want. However, which we can get into a little bit later. But the key at this point in time is what is driving that stock shortage is the fear of the unknown from the majority of vendors, that if I do sell now, what's going to be happening when I'm trying to buy, and will I be able to buy something? And to be fair, that's actually something we're using to our advantage, to be able to get access to people who may want conditions that are a little bit more unique and not to the standard that your traditional 42-day contract or 42-day settlement on a contract will provide.
And I guess the next one, we talk about the state and federal government stimulus packages winding down. What kind of effect do you think that might have in the immediate term, the medium term and the long term?
I can't give you an answer about a financial economic forecast, but I can tell you what I see on the ground. And those stimulus packages have already stopped, and I've noticed no change. In actual fact, we were bidding on a property this evening, and there was 20 registered bidders, and it sold for a lot of money, and a lot of those people were young people as well. So I'm not seeing there was a lot of media concept. There was a lot of feedback around at the time when JobKeeper was finishing up and the mortgage amnesties are winding up, that that's going to increase. It's going to decrease people's ability to perform on property, and it's going to put downward pressure on a whole range of different things. But fundamentally, that's absolutely not what we're seeing on the ground. And I saw a recent statistic when we're talking about mortgage amnesties. Not only have they recovered to pre-COVID, but they're actually at a lower rate. So there are people who are in a better position than what they were than before COVID. So there are the difference between where mortgage amnesties are now is less than where they were pre-COVID. So I just can't see any of that transacting into the marketplace, at least not every marketplace.
And I guess, when we look at the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine and the pandemic, that's been very prevalent over the last year, how do you kind of see that affecting, house prices again in the short, medium and long term?
Mate, consumer confidence is everything. So social proof is what the majority of people who live in or transact in real estate, and that's, I'm just talking about us as professionals or real estate agents as professionals, but you've got to take into consideration that the majority of people will buy a house and move out of the house on average every 7 years. Well, sorry, not the majority, but that's the statistic. Some people will live in a house for 20 years and never have to think about it again. So where they get their information is from what they see around the place, right? So when consumer confidence increases and there's more social proof of things taking place, you'll start to see more positivity in and around that marketplace for vendors as well, but also buyers at the same time. The more consumer confidence, the more people have to perform from a buying perspective.
Perfect. So I guess, in conjunction with people potentially coming back, repatriating more or having the ability to repatriate, we should really not see any, substantial decrease in this rate of increase, should we?
Maybe, yeah, as I said, as we'll be able to conclude when we go through everything that we've got here, real estate is a long game. And statistically, the Australian real estate market increases on average by good percentage points. Sydney, for example, is on average of 7% per annum every year over the last 30, 40 years. So it's real estate isn't about trying to make the right decision on the right marketplace right now. It's about making the right decision on the type of asset that will safeguard you in the long term. But we can get into that as we progress.
Most certainly. So I guess, look, from an opportunities perspective, and we're very lucky here at Milk Chocolate to have a very strong data and analytics team, and that's headed by our senior economist, Kevin Huang, who's got a PhD in economics, econometrics and statistics from the University of New South Wales. And he's maintained that the value of the property market, building activities and other property-related services are so significant to the economy that therefore, the property market is a key draw card of government policies. When the market was weakening, the government introduced a suite of generous incentives such as building and renovation grants, and the stamp duty exemption for first home buyers, was a great example of that. And that'll feed into this next graph, I think, which again, I'll get Brad to speak to more, but again, that consumer confidence and, probably even speaking more so to that fear of missing out and how it really hasn't been that applicable long term. We're always seeing increases even throughout, market declines. There are small blips. Again, I'll get Brad to speak to it further, but overall, on this graph, I think it really speaks volumes to what we're trying to really get to the crux of here this evening.
Yeah, well, we're not naive and suggest that the real estate market never has periods of decline. That's not what would take place. But what we do know is that those periods, and I'll explain this graph in a little bit more detail, those periods form a very minuscule part of the entire story. So when we experience people who are concerned, particularly in a rising market, of buying at the top, in my former life and the last sort of 20 years I've been around in real estate, there's lots and lots of people who will try and time the market. And I've seen heaps of occasions where people will find a perfect home, but be too concerned that the market's too strong and I'm exposed to paying a premium now and potentially losing money over the short term, etc. What those people are trying to avoid is in this graph, and it is purely little grey bars that you see running vertically on that screen. So this shows us from effectively 1983 through to 2019, the national housing prices and their growth trajectory, how they've grown. And we've highlighted little grey sectors that you can see when corrections take place, they're very, very short term traditionally, and they don't happen very often. So across that entire period of time, there's only been effectively 4 to 5. And so people are putting off the opportunity to secure their dream home, their amazing asset, for fear of owning a property during that period of time of decline, or purchasing a property just before that period of decline. But real estate, as we discussed, it's a long game, especially if you're talking about a family home. If you're going to own a property for 10 years, 20 years, it's all about ensuring that the asset selection is the key of your decision-making process, because your asset selection is what will safeguard you against those market corrections.
Great explanation. And I think, again, that graph is, it's a really good representation of not only what you mentioned, but, just that fear and really how it feeds into those really small blips. But again, long term, it's on the upwards and probably will continue to do so. So yeah. I guess,
just before you skip on to that, the most recent one of those, like the 2019 one you see, we're going to make reference as we continue to discuss about the last time we had a significant a significant growth period in the Australian real estate market in 2017. That last period of time there is what we've seen as some level of correction during that, and you also have to tie in COVID through there, because we actually started to see recovery in 2020 from that correction, and traditionally what was the key contributor to that correction was the 2019 federal election. Whenever there's a federal election, that puts the real estate market into a grinding halt, particularly when there's rhetoric and conversation about changes to taxation or legislation that will impact the real estate industry. That effectively spooks investors, and that's what we saw as part of that, is that two things. That 2017 market was heavily influenced by investors that are also heavily influenced by minute changes to a range of different factors, whereas the difference that we're seeing in this recovery is that this is a homeowner-led recovery. And I'm not the only person. So lots of people. So the people who are getting the mortgages, the people who are looking to buy the houses, they're not investors at this point in time. They're the people who are trying to buy their family home.
Very interesting. And look, I think feeding into that, the data and analytics and Kevin feeding into that, we believe we're at the start of a new growth cycle. And the timing, the cycle length is so proportionate to all of this. And we believe, again, the Australian property market is highly volatile in the short term, but firmly trending upward in the long term. And there have been episodes of rapid gain in values in recent history, specifically 2002, 2008, 2010, 2014, 2016, and 2020, even pre-COVID, and then episodes of rapid decline, as we saw in the graph above, in 2005, 2009 post-GFC, 2012, and again around that election in 2019, as you mentioned, Brad. But I guess... And
also the tightening of APRA's lending policies at the same time.
There we go. So, but for long-term holders, it is more important, and this really feeds into the milk chocolate ethos of asset selection. It is so important to select the right property in the right suburb than the timing. This is because the property market is consistently appreciated by around 70% per year over the past several decades, as Brad just mentioned. One or two bad or even good years will be quickly averaged out by that long-term cap growth. So again, what we saw in that graph before, those small blips, they're really offset by that huge uptick. So I guess feeding into that a tiny bit further as well, the last peak that we saw was in 2017 when the Sydney market gained 17% and Melbourne gained 18% compared to the prior years. So, astronomical kind of numbers there. At that time, the federal and state governments were super concerned about a possible bubble, and subsequently, they introduced a range of tightening measures, including tax on foreign buyers and tightening the lending criteria. The market cooled off somewhat, it declined by 9% in Sydney and 7% in Melbourne by March 2019. But then they became worried, I guess, about their overreacted policies. So the federal and state governments introduced a suite of measures, including interest rate cut that we saw recently and the easing of lending criteria. So the market quickly picked up until, unfortunately, the outbreak of COVID last year in March. So in fact, what we're seeing, the current median prices are just equal to the 2017 peak, indicating there is no gain in the period between 2017 and 2021, which in fact strengthens the forecasting that the property market has room to grow in the next 6 to 24 months, if not further. Taking into account the duration of previous boom cycles, the current one has just begun, and there are other heavyweight factors, which we've spoken about in somewhat, but we'll go into a bit more detail now, I guess, that will drive the market up in the next 1 to 2 years even further. So we have said here that, the reopening of international borders, which have been scheduled for the end of 2021, potentially a bit optimistic, but who knows, will enable mass arrivals of immigrants, tourists and international students, which will significantly boost that demand for housing, which, Brad, I think you can talk to a bit more as well.
Yeah, mate, particularly for the apartment sector and also the reintroduction of investors, because if there are, if there's an influx of potential tenants and we start to see an increased level of demand for rental properties, you'll start to see an increase of investors enter the market again, which will help to support the strength of the market at the same time. But I think, like, one of the key points that is a standout for me in this data is that and it was only in March that we have the Australian market has reached the same point that 2017 finished. So what we've been seeing since effectively, November or a little, there's the sort of lightening of the COVID restrictions is a recovery to where we left off. And that means what we're talking about here is the commencement of a new growth cycle. And what we speak about internally with our team is that effectively we're seeing that the new establishment of new, setting a new median values and the commencement of that process. And it's literally the very beginning. So we've met this is a very basic explanation for probably highly intelligent people looking at this. So forgive me if it's oversimplified, but effectively we're getting back to where we were, and now it's time for a new growth cycle. And there is a significant amount of underlying components to the marketplace that will support that. And a lot of those things that we've been talking about now. So our biggest concern at this point in time for people who talk about or have concerns about, I don't want to enter the market now because I'm going to have to pay too much. Our concern is, what happens if you don't? And what a lot of people are talking about is the case, and we continue to see price growth. In 6 months' time, you're going to have to pay more for the same asset. That's realistically the reality of what we're sort of working through with a lot of people, and even the people who are actively currently trying to buy right at this point in time. You're seeing a lot of this FOMO isn't about missing out on the right house, for example. It's about knowing that they can sense this level of competition in the market. So it's about trying to secure a property at this price now before it becomes more expensive in 2 months' time, or in some instances in a week's time.
Yeah, most certainly. And I guess, to tie into that as well, that there's been an incredibly low level of new building approvals during the pandemic. And that's likely going to lead to a shortage of housing in the coming years, making it much higher for buyers to secure their purchases, which again, I'm sure you would agree with wholeheartedly that's definitely one of the key factors when it comes to, the issue of stock that we talk to so much, and then the availability of houses, right?
Yeah, mate, it's just another contributing factor there. Without new houses being built, or with a lower level of new houses being built because of the downward activity during COVID, I mean, you can't build a house in a couple of months, right? It takes 12, 18 months to effectively build a house. So there's, we may see those building numbers start to pick up, but it's still going to take 12 to 18 months before those building numbers become habitable and people can buy them and move into them and live in them. And so it's just another contributing factor to the lack of available stock on the market.
Yeah, most certainly. I think, that might be a good segue into, I guess, how we've been successful here at Milk Chocolate and how we've really mitigated, all these market factors and things like FOMO and the lack of stock and so on and so forth. And, it's probably good just to start from our perspective, again, for those who haven't engaged us in, even just an internal or, initial email or Zoom call, what our purchasing ethos is. And Brad, you can speak to this again. I'm handing it over to you quite a bit, but again, you're the expert in this. So yeah, when we talk about a milk chocolate house, and especially certain states and territories and even areas, what are we really looking for? What's the main contributing factors for us, when it comes to properties and asset selection as a whole?
Yeah, mate. So I do apologise if people couldn't hear Jack then when a giant aeroplane flew over our building. The people are still flying in Australia. So to answer your question, what we do here at Milk Chocolate is we don't have a one-size-fits-all policy to assisting our clients. We build bespoke plans based on our clients' objectives, personal situations, and financial goals. And what that means is we build a plan based on budgets and what's available. And so we will make purchasing decisions and location decisions based on the available budget. And primarily, however, the key is looking at the fundamentals of those regions at the same time. So just to be clear, it's not like we've got a hand-selected bunch of locations that we say, yep, we're just going to buy a whole bunch of properties here. We make sure that we're delivering a strategy that is bespoke to our clients' requirements in the first instance. So that means that we are buying in multiple locations, but all of them will have the same consistent underlying thread, which is either in a major capital city with access to CBD and an easy access to CBD. So I'm not just talking about drivability, but I'm also genuinely talking about the geographic proximity to a CBD. And if we can stick within 8 to 10 kilometres, that will be outstanding. Following into that, because, and I suppose to enlighten that, because there might be some people who are asking, well, as a result of what was happening in COVID, there's been a lot of transient activity where people will be moving out of the city into regional locations, and the data is absolutely supporting that. There are people who are doing that. However, our team and what we're seeing on the ground and what we're already starting to hear out there in the marketplace, not just the real estate marketplace, but within business, is that there's already starting to have some feedback about people coming back to the office. You can't be you can't, there's not working from home 5 days a week. So we don't believe it will be as stringent. So it may be people can work from home 2 to 3 days a week, for example. But that means there still needs to be commutable distance to a CBD to be able to get access to work.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good flow into, potential, I guess, property styles. And again, that asset selection, which is so key to us, which, again, I'll let you speak to this, but, two good examples here, one on the left, which I do believe is in Queensland. Again, I'll let you speak to it. And one on the right, which I'm going to, assume is in Victoria. But again, please feel free to elaborate further and really give the insight into what a true milk chocolate home looks like for us.
Are we running behind schedule?
No. I didn't mean to take off. I do apologise.
There were still a couple of things we can talk about region selection if you like, but that's all right. But just to make, because this is vitally important, to be fair. But just to cover off on a couple of those other things, the other key thing that we look at as well from a regional perspective or a purchasing perspective is major infrastructure. So access to major infrastructure for multiple reasons. One, providing accessibility issues to and from work, but also the job creation that generates. Excuse me for 1 second. The job creation that generates, the money that it brings into those locations, and then also if the budget doesn't allow us to be purchasing a capital city, we will look at major regional hubs that still have easy access to those capital cities, still have major infrastructure spending projects attached to them, or planned for them, so that the ability to commute to those major CBDs is important, but also that aren't just underpinned by one key economic driver. So what I mean by that is then there's not just one industry that props up that regional town. It's got multiple industries that keeps that regional town afloat in the dry times, for example. So mate, to then address specifically what you're referencing in terms of the perfect milk chocolate home, as I said before, so a regional location is good, but asset selection is also, from our perspective, key to ensuring that whatever you're going to be purchasing is going to safeguard you as much as possible against any changes in the market, because there will be changes in the market. But there are certain things we can look at, and what we look at Milk Chocolate, we call a perfect milk chocolate home. And you're right, mate, the one on the right is Victorian, is the ability to create options, first and foremost. And so what that looks like is whether that might be a raise. So that little image that you can see on the left is talking about a project that we executed where we purchased that home, we raised it, we legally created habitable space underneath, which increased its livable floor space, increased its rental yield, increased the calibre of tenant that we could achieve, and ultimately also increased its value, and it's widened its target market from a resale perspective because it offered more to a larger market segment. So the options for cosmetic renovation, structural renovation, subdivision, options is a key factor, and generally land size is what provides those options. So we will always be targeting homes that have above average land size for the region that we're talking. Not every location has the same land size envelope. Every capital city is different. Every region within a capital city is different. However, we'll always be trying to target the above average land size. One, because that's where the majority of the value is. It's not in the building necessarily. But two, depending on the zoning and what can be done there, it assists in generating those options, particularly from a renovation perspective or a structural extension, for example, where you want to extend rearwards and increase floor space, etc. And then finally, what the image on the right-hand side is sort of leading to is every region in this country has a quintessential character or architectural style. Each capital city is somewhat different, but fundamentally, whether it's a suburb or a location, will always have that quintessential character that's attached to it, and it's a character-rich style of home, and that's something that we always target. There's multiple reasons for that. One, they don't just build them like that anymore, but two, they are the types of assets that, when it comes from a resale perspective, will always find it easier to create an emotionally connected purchaser. And emotionally connected purchasers put into competitions effectively in theory for premium prices. So homes that people can't replicate anymore, which are character rich for that region, and they're also becoming insanely popular as a result of the fact that they're quintessential to the region that people are living in. So a lot of people, for example, in Melbourne or Victoria, some parts of Victoria will be, late Victorians or California bungalows or Edwardian cottages that are ultra popular and generally always in key locations at the same time. They're in the older regions of suburbs. And often too, they have the larger land sizes for that pocket. So character, options, location and aspect are some of the key drivers that we're talking about from a milk chocolate home.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, just off the top of your head, is there a specific region, that I guess we're looking at in particular at the moment when you talk about those, let's say, not main metropolis cities, but those areas where it is still commutable, to the CBD of that major city that's nearby?
And I think people have to sign a contract with you, wouldn't they, to be able to get that sort of information a little bit. But mate, the short answer is we're buying in we are buying in multiple states and territories. There's only 2 or 3 states and territories that we're not purchasing at the moment. And that's for a number of different factors, a number of different reasons. But again, and it comes down to the bespoke and tailored nature of the game plans that we build out for our clients. And we've got clients that we've been purchasing multiple properties for in those game plans that will be in multiple states and territories, because it's also about ensuring that we're diversifying the risk about purchasing in different marketplaces. But to give you an idea, at this point in time, we're like, the character, mate, that's the best answer to that question.
That's right. It's probably a good segue into what's happening on the ground. And this would usually, if we were doing it month by month, we'd be much more granular and not seeing this amount of green. But where the market is at the moment, is the data matching what we're seeing on the ground? Is your team actually seeing this green in every state and territory? Is that matching?
Yes, mate, is the short answer to that question. So what that green indicates, so this is actually supposed to be like a traffic light system. So red is in really, really slow or stopped in terms of, and this is a sort of like buyer enthusiasm and fluidity. Amber is on the way up to recovery, and green is at the top of a market cycle and highly competitive. And that's realistically what we're seeing across the board nationally at this point in time. And mate, I suppose to give you an overview about, if we start through each little region and pocket to give you an idea, starting from the north of Queensland there, the Sunshine Coast and the Gold Coast, we really started to see that as being the kickoff, particularly toward the end of the COVID restrictions, where a lot of people said, you know what, I'm gonna relocate. I've got the ability to work from different locations, especially from Melbourne and Sydney. We saw a lot of transient activity into the southeast of Queensland, but particularly the Sunshine Coast and the Gold Coast. And those marketplaces have absolutely demonstrated that on the ground. There is fierce competition. There's still a shortage of stock. The prices that are being achieved are premiums, and we have to engage every resource that we have to mitigate competition. So for us at this point in time, our primary objective, if we can't get access to off-market opportunities, is about competition mitigation. And so that we're having to do that every minute, every day at this point in time. So primarily, even though the Sunshine Coast and Gold Coast aren't capital cities, they're not regional locations either. Fundamentally, like access to Brisbane, the major CBD, is very easy, particularly from the Sunshine Coast now. They are lifestyle opportunities, so lifestyle locations, and we've seen some growth in those. Brisbane, we've been purchasing property in Brisbane since 2017, and we've got faith in that marketplace. And we're now starting to see the regions that we've been forecasting for some significant gentrification and some significant growth. What we're seeing on the ground now is exactly what we had anticipated for those marketplaces, and that is where 6 months ago we had time and there weren't a significant amount of competition on properties. We're now purchasing homes that had 50 other people at the first open house, but those 50 other people are young families and first home buyers, not always necessarily investors. They're people who are relocating to some of those middle and outer ring locations because of what we call a neighbouring effect, where the perception of value in some of the blue chip areas or even just outside those blue chip areas are unachievable. We see a lot of the marketplace then transient to those locations that still offer very similar lifestyle opportunities, and still the raw fundamentals that those other suburbs did offer, but for a much more achievable price point. The side effect of that is that those marketplaces also see significant growth, and that's exactly what we've seen in Brisbane, particularly in the regions that we shop in. Canberra, I know we know that's not exactly where Canberra is, but to get all those dots on the page, that's where Canberra is. The Canberra market has been one of the strongest performing real estate markets in Australia for a long time, and even during COVID, values increased in Canberra. Vacancy rates were below 1%. Unemployment rates are still ridiculously strong. And it's a market that, as I said, we bid on a property this evening. It was in Canberra. There was 20 registered bidders. And there's absolutely still an appetite for property, even though it's had some significant growth over the last, particularly 3 months. Sydney has generally always leads the way in a property recovery in Australia, and now isn't necessarily any different. Particularly what we're seeing on the North Shore, there is lots and lots of buyers who are prepared to pay money for good quality houses in the North Shore, but effectively everywhere in Sydney and Melbourne. Hobart, where Hobart is an interesting one because on paper, the statistics on Hobart are very, very strong. But what we've got to take into consideration, Hobart started from a much lower base than what the majority of the other capital cities, particularly Sydney and Melbourne, did. And so the ability to have, double-digit numbers as a result of increase in median values is a little bit more achievable. However, the market is obviously still quite strong in Hobart. Adelaide has been a consistent performer for a long period of time as well, and is continuing to do so. Ballarat, I accidentally skipped. Ballarat is a market that we've also been buying in since 2017, and it's a little bit of a testament to some of the key indicators that we use when we're selecting regions about we're now seeing the benefits of our decision-making process, because there are lots of people who no longer have the same level of attachment to the Melbourne CBD, who are seeing a significant increase in value or what have you, and seeing more opportunity from a lifestyle perspective in places like Geelong and Ballarat, for example, where they can still easily access the CBD via train. And the amount of infrastructure spending that is going to those regions is still strong, and the gentrification that's taking place in those regions is strong. We sort of talk about lightly that there's lots of Melbourne bringing people coming from Melbourne to bring Melbourne into Ballarat, but it's significantly more affordable than Melbourne, and a little bit of a different lifestyle change. And we're seeing lots and lots of activity from other purchases in Ballarat. And Perth is Perth is making its way through some positive growth for the first time in a long time. So Perth had either flat or negative, prices for a long time, and we've now started to see Perth increasing in values again, and that the competition that's coming with that is good. There's lots and lots of buyers looking to purchase in Perth. There's investors that are making their way back into the Perth market, and it's already a strong market, and potentially one that we can see further competition on as part of our buying. And Darwin as well, particularly the apartment market in Darwin has always historically been quite strong. It's probably, if I had to select one marketplace at this point in time that hasn't seen the same level of intensity, is probably been Darwin. I'm not saying it's not performing well, it's just that the intensity hasn't been as vigorous.
Any particular reasons that, come to mind straight away, or just?
Mate, none that are outstanding, to be fair. It's a good question. Thanks, Jack.
Just a little curveball,
Yeah, it's always fun.
Look, I think
I'll be brutally honest with you. That's one of the locations, the territories that we're not buying in, so I can't give you as an educated response.
That's fair enough. And look, I think that's a really good, market update, and the fact that we are seeing, green on that traffic light system throughout the entire of Australia almost is, highly indicative of, what's happening on the market and on the ground, I should say. And usually there is a bit of a disconnect, and, Brady can probably confirm this, but what we see from the data side of things sometimes doesn't match what we see on the ground. Sometimes there's a huge disconnect there. And I believe, you actually went to Perth yourself the other week and assessed some of that data that was being fed to yourself and made some, I guess, informed decisions on, areas that the data suggested might have been great to purchase in, but were they actually, gentrifying? Were there areas that you would want to live in, as a potential family or even, a great investment opportunity?
Yeah, so mate, I guess that's a good point. It's a little bit more of an internal sort of operation, but we don't just use data to make purchasing decisions. We get on the ground and we check those locations, and we walk the streets and we check out the cafes and we see what's taking place in those areas, because oftentimes there's a reason why the data suggests a suburb is has lots more room for potential growth in comparison to some of its neighbouring suburbs. So it's just about assuring that the locations that we're purchasing have the basic fundamentals and the requirements that we're looking for to ensure that they're going to be a proven location. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Look, I think a good segue to that would be some potential client case studies. We do talk about the rising market, but we've had a lot of success, and we're very proud of this. And it could be a good chance for yourself, especially because I know these purchases are close to your heart, and you're quite proud of what we've seen to date, especially in terms of the cap growth. So look, example number one, a great investment purchase from yourself, Brad, and I guess I keep throwing it back to you, but this is one that you're particularly proud of. So
yeah, so I guess the reason why we're showing these is it's like a bit of a summary of the culmination of what we've just spoke to you about and how it translates in the real world. So this is a property that we purchased. I won't give the exact address away or any of our clients' details, but it's a property that we purchased in Canberra back in September 2020. And of course, we're not going to suggest for a minute that there isn't significant growth as a result of what's taking place in the market. That is the case. However, this is an example of a property that we were able to secure off market due to the vendor circumstances. They weren't in a position to sell with a traditional marketing campaign and have a standard settlement option. And all of the locations that we're buying in, we have significant relationships, particularly if we've been buying those locations for some time with the good quality agents in that. So that often gives us opportunities to be able to get access to properties before they hit the market for whatever reason. And this was one of those. And when we talk about the perfect milk chocolate property, it was character rich for the region. It's a Canberra red brick, which if you're from Canberra, Canberra, that that was once, not an overwhelmingly special thing, but it is absolutely something that's quintessentially Canberran. And as we're seeing the marketplace, as we're seeing the marketplace evolve and younger people come into that marketplace, they're proud of where they live, and that Canberra red brick is proving really popular to embrace and extend. The truss roof construction, so extensions are really achievable. Internal reconfigurations are really achievable. And the advantage of this, it has above average land size. So it was just shy of 900 square metres. It had great side clearance, and it met the brief perfectly, which was that we were purchasing a home that we could then also build a granny flat on the back of the property, increase rental yield. And so from a basic asset selection point of view, this is a home that provides multiple options, was character rich, and we purchased it off market. A couple of weeks after we purchased this home for $628,000, another property sold just recently for $675,000 due to competition. And now, effectively, we're looking at a home that has created about 19.4% capital growth. And at the conclusion of the construction of the granny flat, we'll look to produce 6% rental yield, which is almost, effectively positively geared.
Great result. I mean, 19.4% in what, 6 months or less is, or just a bit more is quite outstanding. And I think if my maths serves me correct, a current evaluation of around 750 is quite incredible without that.
Probably still fairly conservative, to be fair.
Yeah, perfect. And I think, look, we talk a lot about the investment side of things, and the other side of the business as well is we do have a lot of, I guess, expats and even locals that come to us and just want to utilize us for, local asset selections, and we can definitely do that. And Brad, I'll let you speak to this one as well, because again, this is a PPOR, so, primarily paid place of residence. And again, it was a great asset selection, and I'll again let you talk to this one, but it's something that when we do talk a lot about investment, there is that other side, which is basically those forever homes that we talk to as well.
Yeah, mate, absolutely. Well, what we like to always do is we don't just build investment strategies. We will often piece together. We will often help people execute on their primary place of residence, whether it's because they're overseas or they just need the assistance. But we will always encourage people to take the same approach when it comes to asset selection for their lifestyle properties or for their own home. And this is a perfect example. I love working with this client. She's amazing, and she had just come back from San Francisco. Potentially was happy to look at an apartment, but we encouraged her to have a look at something that gave her some land. We prioritised location, accessibility, and she was able to secure this amazing little semi pre-market. So there was a couple of other people around, but effectively no marketing campaign, no competition. We wrapped up the deal. We paid a premium to be able to do that. But the purpose of that is we're still mitigating competition, because we knew if that went to the open marketplace, who knows where the price can end up, particularly in this current market. So don't get me wrong, there's always the opportunity to pay premium price to secure the right quality of asset, just under the right conditions at the same time. And now she's got an amazing property that suits her needs perfectly, presents beautifully. She doesn't have to spend any more money on it. She can live in it really happily. And she's literally, she's a block away from, not even a block, almost just a street away from the heart of Newtown and everything that she needs for her nightlife.
Yeah, amazing. And look, I think that's two great examples again of the milk chocolate ethos in full effect, both from an investment standpoint and that forever home perspective as well. So look, I did send out an email before this, not only inviting you all, but just inviting some questions. I am conscious of time, obviously. We do have people from all walks of the planet joining us tonight. So we have answered some of these in quite some detail. We'll roll through them, and then if we do have some time after, we'll move to that live Q&A.
We do have a question from someone online too.
Yeah, I've seen that come through, so we'll circle back to that one. But, I think we really speak to this one, but is now really the right time to buy? The market seems to be out of control and I'm just buying due to FOMO.
And I'm just buying due to FOMO. Is right now. Yeah, the answer to that question is going to have a disclaimer attached to it, which is there is no crystal ball. Right. However, when we piece together everything that we're seeing on the ground, all of the actual data rather than the headlines that you see, particularly the fact that we're starting a new recovery or a new growth cycle rather than just a recovery, which we did speak about before. Our concern for people who want to hold off because of this concept that we're in a bubble as a result of people's FOMO is that realistically the likelihood is whatever you're not purchasing now in 6 months' time, you're going to have to pay more. And here's the reason why. Aside from all the other stuff, but from the on-the-ground stuff. What is most likely going to happen is if we see an increase in stock levels, as in more options for purchasers, we've got a really large pool of buyers and a larger pool of stock. It still means we've got a higher level of supply, a higher level of demand than supply. What that translates to is it doesn't relate to property prices coming back. It just means the rate of growth slows to a more manageable level. So to put that in context, like markets over the last 2 months alone in say the Gold Coast or Sydney, in almost 3% and almost 3%, 6% in 2 months it's significant. However, the risk of property prices necessarily coming back isn't necessarily the scenario. It's purely about a more manageable rate of growth over that whatever period of time it is. But that is dependent on the larger stock availability.
Certainly.
So, we would need to know that person's individual circumstances and what they were trying to achieve. But as long as the asset selection was correct and they were using the correct strategy to secure that asset selection, then absolutely, why would you not be buying now if there was a risk you're going to pay more in 6 months?
Certainly. I guess the second question, surely this isn't sustainable, when a price is predicted to plateau, if not decline. And I know you keep talking about this crystal ball, right? Which kind of feeds into this one as well. But,
my answer to the previous question is exactly the answer to that.
Yeah.
Not the decline part necessarily, but when we can start to see price or the rate of price growth start to ease is likely as a result of more stock coming onto the market. But the problem, when we were talking to agents in November and December, they weren't having conversations with vendors. There was no engagement. The difference is they're now having conversations with vendors, but they're just not bringing those properties to the market all the time necessarily. So there is still sentiment. There's still a requirement for people to move. It's just going to take a change in some of those stock levels in order to dilute the significant, intense level of competition that we're seeing for people. And it's honestly, the FOMO concept, the fear of missing out, is real, but it's the fear of missing out on a property because there's no forecast of any more becoming available. So it's not, there's a lot of contributing factors, but it's setting new norms is what it's doing.
I think the next one's a good one. We again spoke about this, and we do keep these kind of things close to our heart in some respects. But what areas are we forecasting as having the best cap growth in the long term?
Yeah, mate, that would be a question that I don't know. I feel like that's more of a chief economist or a property economist from our data team's question. But again, the way I'll answer it, and it sounds like I'm dodging it, it's going to come down to the quality of purchase that the property that you purchase is the key answer. Because if you buy a really terrible house or a really terrible townhouse or a really terrible apartment in the marketplace that just so happens to see the best capital growth ever, it's still going to be a really terrible house or a really terrible apartment. And when that does slow and there are more options available and buyers can be more picky with what they want, they're the first properties that suffer. So again, we would just reiterate that it's going to come down to asset selection and then potentially engaging with someone like Milk Chocolate or whoever you're comfortable with to discuss about what your objectives are financially, whether it's going to be a passive income, because obviously capital growth is one component of investing, but rental yield and passive income creation is also another.
Certainly. Very valid points. And I think, you know, a good final question that we received is also one that you've touched on briefly, but, you know, with offices starting to fill up again, how will this affect areas that saw a boom during the pandemic when people were forced to work from home?
That's a good question. And I don't want to be like a Grim Reaper or anything close to that. But some of those locations that don't have easy access to those offices don't fit the core fundamentals of the regions that we traditionally buy in for that very reason. They're very exposed to potentially high levels of growth, but then negative growth as a result of those transits. So the sort of the policy, or not policy, but the conditions that we're talking about is we understand that we believe that it's not always going to go back to what it was, and there is going to be the ability for people to have some more lifestyle orientated sort of locations, but we're sort of drawing the line around about a sort of 2 to 3 hour commutable distance from the CBD, so that if people can work from home for 3 days in a week, they can drive to the office and drive home on those other 2 days quite comfortably. But when you start to talk about, you know, having to travel for a day to get to work and then have to travel back, unless it's going to be guaranteed that people can work from home remotely, and there are organisations that have done that, and they've said, you know, you never have to come back to the office, but that's not everybody. So our concern is that, you know, the poorer type of quality assets in those locations will be exposed to that shift in the market as a result of that.
Perfect. Thanks a lot for that, Brad. I think it's it's a great answer, and mitigating that risk, right, of those really prone areas is key to what we do here in the research before, you know, presenting back even potential areas and ideas. So look, I think from a question standpoint, that's pretty much all we received, or I wouldn't say all we received, but the main ones received, and ones that we felt were easiest to answer and not too specific. So I guess now it's time to kind of open up. We do have a few minutes left to really open up the floor. And if you did have any questions, please, we do have the box open there on the right. You can ask us anything you would like. I can see there's one here from Kira, who asked, do you guys have any info on lending in Australia as an expat? Can it be done, etc.? Look, we, again, prefaced at the start of this conversation, all the advice we give is of the general nature. We do have professional partners that we work with, so I can definitely take that offline with you, Kira, and circle back on that one.
I think it's safe to answer though, Jack, that absolutely the ability for expats to be able to borrow money to purchase a property in Australia is absolutely achievable. And what we're seeing from our clients who are doing so is the interest rates are effectively just as competitive as it is for you know, residents for tax purposes at this point.
Perfect. Well, there hasn't been too much else that's trickled through, Brad. So I guess we will. That's
because we were very detailed, mate.
I mean, there's even a lot, you know, that I'm absorbing as well. It's great to have you on again. This is the first of our monthly webinars, guys. So hopefully you have achieved some sort of newfound knowledge. If not, I apologise, but look, hopefully it has been worth your time. And again, we'll follow this up by sending out this recording. And again, if you've got any further questions, please don't hesitate in reaching out to myself. The email will come from myself with the email attached and phone number as well. So again, feel free to reach out at any point in time. But yeah, on behalf of Brad, myself, and the Milk Chocolate team, we really thank you for being a part of this very first one. And yeah, we really look forward to doing the next one, which we'll send details out on shortly. So thanks a lot, guys, and wherever you are in the world, have a great day, great evening, and farewell.
Bye, everyone.